Hey, it's Chris with Eastern Sierra Avalanche Center. As I sit here dreaming of snow in Bishop in my garage, I'm checking out my gear to make sure it's tip-top for the season. Can't emphasize more how important it is to have your gear functional and safe and good to go before you head out into that cold, snowy environment out there. First of all, I always check out my boots and make sure that all the main pivots and rivets are all good to go. Maybe even some of these newer cables aren't damaged or loose. Also making sure your sole of your boot by these tech inserts here isn't too worn out. My boot's getting pretty worn out there. To go with that, making sure the boot and binding interface are working good, and make sure you have the proper gap between your heel piece and the heel of your boot, and that you have the lateral and forward pressure of your heel piece set properly. A lot of good information online, but the best information source is your local gear shop. Those folks will know how to set up your equipment well, make sure your DIN setting is good and everything's set up appropriately for your skier ability and your weight and whatnot. Highly recommend going into the shop and bringing it in if you have any questions. Also, to go along with the skis, I always make sure all the screws are secured in there. I'll get my screwdriver out, just test them, make sure everything's nice and tight, making sure just everything is functioning and operating appropriately. Getting a good visual on it. That goes with my skins. Is the glue still good to go? Did I store them properly? Or did I leave them in a hot place in the garage and the glue has just become like an awful, just sticky mess, and it's going to ruin my day once I get out there. All that glue will come off on your base. So, whether you're doing AT, you're doing telemark, I'm not using these as much anymore, but just making sure, those primary pieces of equipment are good to go to complement all your avalanche safety gear that you bring with you out there too.
So a few things to think about as we get our split boards ready for the season is we want to remember that all of these connection points on our split board are machine screws. So we definitely want to check and make sure that they're still tight. They will loosen up over time. So this is actually a great thing to do periodically throughout the season, is to double check these screws and make sure they're not loosening up on us. Never a bad idea to add a little extra Loctite to get those ready to go. Another thing we want to do is we want to look at our bindings. So especially for the soft booters out there, give your bindings a good once over. And you're looking for micro cracks or maybe a big crack. Making sure that all these screw points are tight. Check the ladders for excessive wear here. Make sure your buckles are still working and that this lock mechanism is still working as well. And then we want to make sure that it's actually going to interface with our tour mode there, and that we have all the bits and pieces. Maybe that our climbing wires are still working, none of that needs to be fixed or replaced. And then we're going to also want to make sure that the board actually goes together like it should, that all the pieces connect. And then we also want to make sure that our bindings and the pucks are still interfacing correctly, and that we don't need to adjust any of those to get them to fit. So put it together, take it apart, put it into tour mode, put it into ride mode, check all the bits and pieces there. For the hard booters out there, we kind of want to look for the same things. Making sure all our screws are tight, that nothing's loosening up on us. And then we also want to make sure that our boot to binding interface is working all right. So especially if you got new boots over the off season, we want to make sure that we've adjusted the bindings to fit the boot sole length. They do change from boot to boot, even in the same size range. So make sure that that binding to boot interface is working. And then we also, when we come to our hard boots, just like with ski boots, we want to make sure that all the rivets and the pivot points are good to go, that no obvious shifting is happening within the cuff to boot connection points. We also want to check our buckles, make sure these wires aren't breaking or fraying, anything like that. And then we have no obvious cracks or damage to the boot. For soft boots, there's a little less to worry about. But just like with our hard boots, we want to look for damage that might be problematic. You know, if we have a BOA system in the boot, we want to check those wires, make sure they're not fraying or about to wear out, and that sort of thing. Whether you're skiing or splitboarding, make sure you give your equipment a good once over, make sure everything's working, nothing's broken, and yeah, set yourselves up for a fun day out.